Next up, we have Chris Short. Fantastic engineer. You're at AWS at this point, and have been speaking at DevOpsDays Detroit for, 2016? 2017. Every year since 2017. Thank you very much. Talk to you.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. How you doing? Who's local here? Just out of curiosity. Okay. 50%. That's good. That's awesome. Clicker thing. There we go. All right. So we're going to talk about burnout. We're going to talk about my burnout. And this is a talk that has been in the making since the very first talk I gave here in 2017. 2017, I had no idea I had mental health issues. None. 2018, I had a mental breakdown. Sucked. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to get yourself, if you are burned out or need to identify if you're burned out, all the way to maybe fixing that problem for you. But we're going to talk a lot about things that make people uncomfortable, and that's typically what I do on stage. So the slides are very available. You can go along. The links are all embedded. There's another QR code at the end, don't worry. Also, I'm looking for a job. I might be at AWS right now, but that is a short-term proposition at this point. So feel free, scan my CV and see if you want to talk to me about whatever it is you're doing. All right, burnout. Let's start with a statistic. 59% of American workers experience burnout. Some kind of level of burnout. Sorry. That means from about 3 seats over this way, y'all are going to suffer from burnout at some point. That's inevitable. That's the statistics right now. And that's according to Aetna, the health insurance company. So that means it's probably more. 100% of the people speaking here have suffered from burnout. So what is it? What is burnout? This is from an HBR, Harvard Business Review article. I highly recommend you check it out. There'll be another link I want you to check out first, though, later. But this one is a good one. Defining burnout, what is it? You're exhausted for some reason. You feel like you have no energy to do anything. And doing your best work becomes hard. Okay. You start becoming cynical, right? Now there's the mental change. You start becoming cynical, you have a negative attitude towards your work, almost to a point of disassociation. Like, this is my work life, this is my family life, and I'm just in the middle of it. Third, you feel completely ineffective. Like, this is deep burnout. You feel like you're doing less in the same amount of time that it took you to do far more. And it's quite hard to get in the groove and be productive. And this is a common problem that I've seen now with folks. They don't realize they're burned out. So that's why we're talking today. And I had a first encounter with burnout without even realizing it. I wanted to say even kids get burnout, but everyone gets burnout. And when I say kids, I mean 20-year-olds. Like, college students get burnout. High school students get burnout. I went to 3 high schools in 4 years. Did I go to college? No. Why? School. Burned out. Never really got established anywhere, made some friends, would have to move. It sucks. But then there's another friend of mine who I met. His name is Daniel Walker. Today is his birthday, actually. So it's rather ironic he's a part of this talk. Basically, burnout is like your brain sitting on top of a volcano. Eventually, something bad is going to happen to your brain, whether you realize it or not. It could be one event, it could be multiple events. So let's talk about what burnout plus is, because there's burnout plus, and there's burnout plus plus. So being burned out with or without realizing it, while having another burnout-inducing event occur. And, I put just pretty routine stuff in my life that I've dealt with that have brought me burnout. Alcohol, substance abuse, not so much for me, but for other people, yes. Open source contributions. People can get burned out on open source sometimes. And it's happened a lot since the pandemic we've seen. And when I say we, I mean the Kubernetes project specifically. That's the open source project I work in. And oftentimes I feel like I'm not doing enough for that project. And that is something that I have to work on mentally. It's okay. Like if you have a side hustle, I had to set mine down when I realized like my body is now responding to burnout differently, physically. So, back to Daniel. The week before 9/11, I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base, Virginia. That Tuesday, a week before 9/11, my grandmother died. She's in Florida. My parents said, listen, you've got a lot going on. You don't need to feel any obligation to go. Okay, fine. I will grieve up here by myself. Day later, I was hospitalized with flu-like symptoms. Nobody could figure out if it was actually a virus, bacterial, whatever. They put a bunch of IV bags in me, and I felt better. I was burned out. Physically, the work, the strain of losing a grandmother and trying to just push through burned me out. Is this your water bottle? You want it? I just realized it was up here.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. So yeah, flu-like symptoms wasn't really flu. And the next day, I got a phone call. My best friend had died. It was his mom telling me this. It was awful. But then it got worse. I watched my friend, who I'd known for a few years, who I love dearly, have his name dragged, literally dragged through the mud by his own university's newspaper. Keep in mind, this was the week before 9/11. They put out 4 articles from, oh, he died, to, oh, here's the toxicology report. The result was a death of an overdose. Nobody knew in his friend circle at all that he was suffering from shingles, which, if you haven't seen a commercial about shingle vaccines lately, shingles is the same virus that chickenpox is. And you get it through stress sometimes. It just happens. It's already in your body, a weakened immune system, off you go. Well, what was Daniel stressed about? Well, he was a junior at UNC, sitting in Chapel Hill. He had his own place that he shared with 2 friends we went to high school with together and 2 other friends. He had just been rejected from the Wharton Business School at UNC, which was pretty much his lifelong dream to go to since he had moved to North Carolina. Got rejected, went out, partied, like any other college student would to blow off some steam. And when he got home, at wee hours of the AM, not even thinking, oh, let me take my medications for my shingles. One of those medications happened to be a narcotic that made him stop breathing, let alone whatever else was in his system, right? Like none of us knew he was having this problem and struggling with it. And all it took was for someone to say, hey man, is everything all right? And I was busy in the military at the time. So it wasn't like I was checking in on him every day or anything. I didn't even know there was a problem. So it was really nice when somebody wrote in the week after 9/11 and said, this was mishandled very poorly. I didn't prompt anybody to do this. I just managed the aftermath for my friend. This was very vindicating. Now, imagine me at my parents' house after putting my best friend to rest, and I wake up that morning and I see the World Trade Center smoking. And 5 minutes later, plane hits the second tower. I watched that live. I was in the Air Force. What I did in the Air Force was a mixture of IT, communications, and intelligence work. I knew who did it. I knew what the targets were. I even told my ex-wife at the time. I woke her up. I said, the World Trade Center's been hit by 2 planes. If the Pentagon gets hit, we gotta go. I was on leave. She was on leave. We were in Western North Carolina. We both needed to get to Virginia, and we needed to get there 6 hours ago. So the entire world changed that day, at least for me. I'm sure it's not a fun time for anybody to remember. But my life suddenly had a new purpose, and that was to find these people and do what we do. And whatever that was, so be it. So imagine me 3 years ago when they said everybody that perpetrated the 9/11 attacks on America has been captured or killed. That made me happy, and that's kind of sad, to be honest with you. But that was my life for 11 years. So the first 30 years of my life, a lot of trauma. Didn't know it, though. How would I? How would an 8-year-old know that divorce is bad, or that this weird group of weird religious people are talking to your mom a lot, and suddenly your mom marries one of these people? What the hell's going on here? Well, it wasn't normal, and I learned the hard way it wasn't normal. I got into tech when I was 15, thankfully, though. I cut ties with my mother shortly thereafter, just randomly. No coincidence there. And I was better for it. My mom was a toxic person, and it was hard to realize that at the time. I had a kid at the age of 20. I mean, think about the stress that is. I was in the Air Force, so, I had a safety net, but, you have a daughter, and then a couple months, or a year later, literally, almost to the month, you're now fighting a global war. And when I say global, I mean I went everywhere. Mainly Middle East, obviously, but also places like Central America. I got divorced at age 27, so when you get married at 20, those tend to not work out, and that was another lesson learned in life. But in 2003, something weird happened. I got back from both of these wars that we were fighting at the time, Afghanistan and Iraq. We had to do, I was stationed in Tampa, Florida, and we had to do a hurricane evac exercise because, well, we put that in our budget and we can't get the money back, so we're going to do it anyway, with half the people in the unit that should have come, because some of them are still in the Middle East. So that means I had a lot of work to do. I was essentially the only person proficient in everything that we had to do in my duty section. So I did everything from helping build tents, grounding. Everything needs an electrical ground. When you're out in the middle of a field, guess what that is? A series of poles put into the ground. Sometimes you got to, and you measure it, and it has to have no resistance whatsoever. So you just keep going until it does. So yeah, here's some pictures of me in the military, just to prove that, this was a thing. But I really do enjoy the picture of me sitting on a toilet with a switch above me. It's like the epitome of Eastern North Carolina networking. But, okay, so I'm a veteran. What does that mean, though, for me long term, right? I'm injured, I'm a veteran. What is the last stage of my life going to look like? That's been something I've been studying recently, because there's other stuff going on. We thought we had everything figured out, but turns out there's multiple issues that might not have been diagnosed in 2003, 2010, and might not be until now. So look at the table, yeah, it's not great. So I have this injury in my neck and shoulder. Lower back now is giving me problems. I've had C-spine, T-spine. I've had more injections and epidurals than you could shake a stick at. it's irreparable. That's the sad thing. They can only treat it. They can't fix it, at least not yet. There's a lot of technology that's out there that might make life better for somebody that's disabled and in constant pain. Like I get no days off from pain. Like I hurt right now, standing here talking to y'all. The adrenaline's helpful. So this is why I am a decent public speaker. But I also suffer from anxiety and depression and PTSD and all these other things that come along with that. The overall age of death for 100% service-connected disability U.S. veterans is 67 years. I'm over halfway, like well over halfway. I'm 43. So like I'm looking at less lifetime. The goal is to get to 70, right? Like I'm going to set a little, I'm not 100% disabled according to the VA too. I know it boggles the mind, but Congress actually passes laws here in the US that say this particular injury has to have this restriction for it to be counted as a service-connected injury. And they have scales from 10% all the way to 100% disabled. And I'm at 70. Imagine what it takes to get 100, right? Like, that's a lot. So, yeah. And, there's a source in the study and the data's all there. Lower levels of disability have not been studied. And if you're 100% disabled and in this room right now, congrats, because I know that is hard. I know your life is hard. I know the struggle you've been through. It took me 7 years to get the VA appeal done. 7 years, 2 lawyers. It was hell. All right, burnout plus plus, that's what this talk is about. Like, we're talking past burnout, past, not realizing it, past everything. Being burned out with or without realizing it, while having multiple burnout-inducing events occur in your life at the same time. Layoffs, jobs lost, miscarriages, buying and selling a home, having a kid, global pandemics, toxic family members in my case, career ambiguity in my case. As I mentioned, I'm looking for work. So these can happen all at once. And that was my 2017. The end of 2017 for me was a lost job opportunity and essentially laid off. A miscarriage. We had just bought a home in June. We didn't have a kid, but the miscarriage, that check that box, and the global pandemic was still coming. Don't learn the hard way is what I'm going to say. My mental breakdown actually completed its last step after watching a Netflix show, a docudrama, that talked about the National Security Agency, the National Reconnaissance Office, and did a very good job of explaining the work I did in the military. Like, to a T, described my entire assignment in one intelligence unit in 10 episodes. But it completely just broke my perception of the world. I went from feeling like I did good work in the military to being ashamed of it after the Snowden leaks. Snowden and I worked on the same networks at the same time. So while he was scarfing down data, I was out there trying to just get my job done. When you think you're doing the right thing for your country, and then someone comes and tells you you're violating everybody in your country's Fourth Amendment rights, that's tough. I had just kind of glossed over it before, but this documentary sent it home, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I don't want anybody that was like me to ever watch it. It was that good. They did a phenomenal job. They literally could have just interviewed somebody from my unit for this story, and they just put it in a different place and time. So, that was the point I realized I needed help. When I was in the VA system, because the VA was supposed to take care of me and all my needs, according to the VA. The VA is a really big pharmacy. For years, they sent me things like morphine, Norco, Percocets, whatever, you name it, through the mail. Funny story, one morning I went out to my mailbox and I noticed that the DEA was raiding the house across the street. As I pulled out my VA pills, a level 1 controlled substance that went across state lines, the next day I get an article sent to me from my wife, and she says, hey, that DEA bust across the street, they were stealing drugs from the VA. It's like, well, of course they were, because hell, it's easy. They ship stuff all the time. When you do something all the time, do you realize what that does to your like operational security level? Like when you're constantly bending it? You want to talk about threat actors, oh my gosh. You know, a high school kid that just happened to understand that, you know, this dude gets morphine in the mail, how would I know if it was taken? All I would know is it was missing, and that would ultimately get blamed on me. So it was my responsibility to make sure these drugs were safe when they weren't in my control. It's wild, just wild. So I was going to therapy once a month, sometimes once every 2 months because of travel and things. They just kept giving me pills and pills and pills, and we had already been down this road. I was addicted to morphine at the age of 31, thanks to the Veterans Administration. So that was the point that we kind of realized when the psychiatrist at the VA said, I can't put you into any of my therapy programs. You're too smart. You will tear them apart. Literally said that. I literally said his therapists were not good enough to treat me. And this is the people that are supposed to take care of me. And this is the time when they were pouring billions of dollars into the VA budget because they had to, because it was so bad. But I had this negative perception of the world. Very negative. I mean, think about it. Your mother grew up in a cult. Do you like any religion? No. Your wife's a Catholic, like by birth. Your son's a Catholic by birth. Turns out he's actually Jewish. But that's neither here nor there, right? Like I did a 23andMe and learned some things. My mother was a pathological liar, so I never believed any of the stories she told us. But there was one story about how we escaped, or how our ancestors escaped from oppression in Europe. That turned out to be true. And that was eye-opening for me, because for the longest time I thought that was just a made-up story. I confirmed it with a 23andMe test. That also kind of contributed to the, oh man, I'm actually somebody I didn't even know I was. So again, this weird worldview that had to get fixed. So what did I do to get out of it? Right? I'm in this horrible mental situation. It started at home. First things first is identifying the fact that I can have panic attacks. I didn't even know what a panic attack was the first time I had one. It was awful. I don't even remember it. My wife said I did horrible things. Completely blacked out. Didn't even know. So I got lucky. I mentioned I'm a Kubernetes contributor. We're doing a Know Before You Go for KubeCon next week, me and a couple friends. But I work in a SIG called, and if you're not familiar with Kubernetes and the way it's broken up into special interest groups. And contributor experience is like my group, okay? And one of the SIG leads at the time, 2018, this was while I was working at Red Hat, you know, she was a friend through the community. And, you know, I knew like I needed to navigate the private healthcare system now. And she gave me all the tools. She mentored me and taught me how to engage the mental health community through our insurance, because she had the same insurance, and exactly what to do. I had no idea. No idea. You need a psychiatrist, you need a therapist, and that's hard to find, right? Like a good therapist is hard to find. But we knew, based on the VA, that I didn't need CBT, cognitive behavioral training. I didn't need that. I needed a wipe and reload, essentially. So you gotta have a psychiatrist too, because they're the ones that are gonna give you your medications. They're a doctor, they're a PA, they're some kind of person with a license that can assign you prescriptions. I'm on like 5 or 6 things for anxiety, depression, helped me sleep. Horrible nightmares was my problem in the military. That followed me. That didn't just stop when the military ended. They just got more horrific. So I knew, like I said, I knew I needed something more powerful than CBT. This gentleman's crying over here. I am very happy that he recognizes what these 4 letters mean. EMDR. I forget what they mean, but it is essentially a series of eye movements and preparation and therapy that emulates REM sleep and what the human body does with memories. While you're sleeping, it fully processes them. Well, it's hard to fully process a memory while you're having an apocalyptic nightmare. So we needed to do some things to fix that. 3 years of EMDR therapy to fix the previous 30-some years, 40 years. The idea behind it is, this is really disturbing to me now. And this included sexual assault, this included cults, this included mental abuse, physical abuse, the whole 9 yards, right? Like, then a war or two and, military service and injury on top of all that. Like I said, I needed to wipe and reload. I needed a perception change. My glass was always half empty. It was never half full. You can't live life like that, though. You have to process these things that what I had done, and I had learned very well in the military, was this tactic of compartmentalization. Only people with a certain level of clearance and access to materials could talk to that group or access the materials. But I had 4 different assignments, 2 of them directly attached to units out in the field. I mean, I got phone calls from people while I was in one place and they were in another, and something bad happened. And they just needed somebody to talk to. And I'm on a satellite phone in the middle of nowhere. They're on the side of a mountain in the middle of nowhere in Afghanistan with a satellite phone. I mean, this stuff happens. EMDR helped me. Will it help everybody? No. But if you are like me and have suffered through a lot without even realizing it, because I didn't even know that this was a lot at the time. So basically the idea is this memory disturbs me, therapy, EMDR, the eye movements, tracking an object, make sure, like I'm doing it right now, I can feel my brain doing stuff. It did something for me. Like the back of my head would tingle, I would feel tightness in my chest when I was anxious, and when I was relieved, that tightness would go away, the tingling would stop. And then a couple weeks later, we'd revisit the same memory, and I wasn't disturbed by it anymore. It was literally magic. But it's actual science. It's amazing. And this just gets better and better and better. And you start hearing about it more and more and more in the mainstream media now. So how do you get out of the burnout plus, right? Like, I owe a lot to my wife. She showed me what a normal life, a normal family, and normal behavior is. I didn't have like that before. And yeah, had a divorce, got engaged again, got married, we're happily married, coming up on our 13th anniversary. We had a kid in 2015, his name's Max, he's awesome. But also, I had to cut ties with my father. I'd already cut ties with my mother when I was 15. 20 years later, I'm cutting ties with my father. Why? Lying to me in my house. Don't lie to me. Just don't lie. But yeah, basically came to visit Max as a newborn, trashed the house, and told us Max was colicky. It's like, oh, cool, thanks. Yeah, no, we're done here. So once those shackles were off, that was what was keeping me in North Carolina. And we were taking all our vacation time and using it here to visit family. It's like, well, let's put our plan into action. Let's go speak at DevOpsDays Detroit in 2017. Thank you all. This is hallowed ground for me. That was my first speaking engagement ever. They gave me a shot and my career has taken off. I got a job here in Detroit, so now I live here. I actually bought this shirt over there. But it wasn't until I realized that like something was holding me back and the breakdown happened. And, I began therapy, but in the middle of all that, the VA finally acknowledged everything. They said, yes, you have nerve damage. Yes, you have a shoulder injury. Yes, you have a neck injury. You likely have other problems. Oh, you're psych eval. We noticed something weird. There's a note in here from the therapist that said you stared at a picture of the World Trade Center for the entire hour-long session. Yeah, that's what my brain was like. It would get fixated on things, never let go. It would run things down to every possible situation, every possible scenario. It felt like I was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. It was interesting, but it's hard to get rid of that. You know that Chinese spy balloon that flew over the US? Yeah, I heard about it when it entered Canadian airspace and learned that it would be heading to the US. I told my wife exactly what was going to happen. When the NOTAM went up to close all airspace around Charleston, I knew what type of fighter aircraft, where it was coming from, and what type of weapon they would use to take the balloon down. And I called each and every one hours before it happened. This stuff doesn't leave you. That's something that I've had to learn. I might be a national security expert, but I don't want to be. So how do you assess if you're burned out? This is what opened my eyes quite a bit. And I found this after I lost my job in 2017. And I was writing a newsletter at the time, and I put this in there, and that newsletter just took off like wildfire. And this assessment that you do to see if you or your team, for that matter, is burned out is phenomenal. If there's one slide you take away from this talk, this should be it. Go take this now. Use it as a baseline, right? We talk about concussions and, we have these ways to determine baseline, and if something has, faded away, same thing here. Your burnout can go up and down. You can be more and more burned out, and you can exponentially do it like I did. Don't recommend it. But you can't change what you don't measure. That's what we've learned from DevOps. Detroit is my refuge. Left my family behind in North Carolina. I'm actually closer to my daughter now, who lives in Ohio, just graduated college. I helped her move into college. Financially supported her, got her through the pandemic. It's a call every other day almost. But I couldn't help others until I helped myself. And it's a large thanks to just moving up here. So, you can go from Hickory, North Carolina, to speaking on stage in Detroit. Yeah, it's possible. And I'm not trying to say like anybody can do this. It was hard. It was incredibly hard. But I know if I can do it, other people can. And if you need help figuring out what your next steps are, let me know. I will help you. See, there's my daughter and son the first time she came up to visit us in our new house. I mean, Max is 4 in this picture. He's going to turn 8 this month. It's pretty cool. And so, yeah, they're buddies. A friend of ours' daughter, same name, Aubrey. She was coming to babysit the other day, and he was like, "Wait, Aubrey's coming from Ohio to babysit me?" And I was like, "No, different Aubrey." It's kind of funny. But these medical conditions that came along with my complete burnout are still things that I deal with today, as well as the physical injuries. This is a pill bag. This is a bag full of timers, essentially, to keep me on track with all my medications. It is hard. This takes up a significant amount of time for all varying reasons. Access to medication was a problem during the pandemic for a lot of people. I got lucky. It wasn't for me because we found other ways. Not everybody's that fortunate or lucky sometimes. Now that I'm evaluating jobs, I'm realizing that healthcare is the number one thing, not salary. I'm the one who carries the healthcare and earns all the money in the family. My wife is an amazing coach with her sisters at St. Mary's. They just won the Catholic League Volleyball Championship. All 3 levels, freshman, JV, and varsity. Very proud of her. She couldn't do that until I was better. When I got better, that became a very real thing that I could help her with. Because I can watch my nephews, I can do whatever. I have flexibility. But I'm grounded and I'm being treated and getting better. First thing you do, the sooner you accept the situation you're in, the sooner you can improve it, right? Change what you measure. This isn't always just your fault. I blame myself for a lot. That wasn't my fault. Reached out to friends. Giving myself grace is something that I work on every day. It gets better, folks. It does. But accept who you are. You don't have to identify as disabled. You don't have to do these things, but you have to accept that there are things holding you back. Sometimes those things are mental things, and sometimes those mental things are like your first memory as a child being an argument between your mom and dad that got physical. Forgive yourself. That's not your fault. Break the cycle. You can break the cycle if your parents are abusive. You have that power. I know it doesn't feel like it sometimes, but I was way better the second I cut my ties with my toxic family. My problem was I put work ahead of everything else. I would compromise my physical health and mental health for work, and I had experienced many traumatizing things. And we made this list with my therapist. All the things we need to go through so I can get better. And we went through them all. It took a long time. I needed help. Do you know if you need help? Don't run over to somebody having a panic attack and say, would you like to talk about mental health? No, don't do that. But if you know you are struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help. I was still dealing with the military stigma of, oh, going to mental health will end your career. You won't have a security clearance anymore. All these bad things will happen. So keep yourself organized going forward. I've found that helps me. You need to be able to communicate effectively about what's happening to you to others. And oftentimes you have to let go of your fears to find peace. Here's every source in this slide deck. And again, you can download the slides from that QR code. There's an enormous amount of information in here. And I put this up here for a reason. It's because people need this information. People don't understand how healthcare works in our system. This is my dog. Just got her in February. I love her to death. This is what she'll be wearing for Halloween this year. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, everybody.